So hello everybody, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. But to all of you, welcome back to the fourth and final day of the 2020 Asia Pacific Spectrum Management Conference. We really appreciate all of you joining us again for today's sessions. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the schedule we have ahead of us today very shortly. But just before I do that, there are a couple of things I wanted to mention just to kick today off. So first of all, I would like to once again say a big thank you to all of our supporters, partners and sponsors for the event. You can see all of the different organizations who are involved in the event on the screen beside me now. Once again, we really do appreciate the support of each and every one of you, and without you, the event wouldn't be possible. So thank you very much for that. I also quickly wanted to mention a little bit about the numbers of you guys out there who've been participating at the event so far. So we really have been grateful to all of you for your involvement, and we've been overwhelmed by the number of people we've had joining us for the various sessions. So I think we looked at things last night, and up until today, we've now had 670 of you join directly via the event platform for the sessions, and another 600, just over 600, via the live streams on social media, on Twitter and on YouTube. So almost 1,300 people in total have been joining us for the sessions. And this actually means that I think this is the largest ever event we've done as part of the Global Spectrum series. I think it just tops the 1,200 people we had participating at the European version of the event a few weeks ago. So thank you all so much for your involvement, and also thank you for all of your questions and comments that have been coming in throughout the various sessions. I think we've had a lot of questions, a lot of comments in all of the sessions, and your input and that involvement really has added another element to the various panels that we've been having. So really do appreciate that, and please do continue with that today. And any questions, any comments you have for the speakers, please do, as you have been doing already, add those to the chat, and we'll get those brought up as part of the discussion sessions that are taking place. One other thing to mention on that side is the audience polls. So we do once again have polls running for all of the sessions, so you can see the polls and vote on those polls by using the poll tab on the right hand side of your screen as well. So on to today's proceedings. We have another busy day ahead of us. So we're starting off very shortly with a session that we have, which is going to be looking at low frequencies, at emerging shape of spectrum usage in the sub-1 gigahertz band. So we have an excellent lineup of panel, an excellent lineup of speakers, I should say, joining us for that. And I will be introducing you to those, or I won't actually, I'll be introducing the moderator, Mark, who's going to introduce you to those very shortly. We then move on following that to our showcase sessions for the day. So we have two showcase sessions running today. We have Showcase 1, which is looking at industry transformation powered by 5G, hosted by Ericsson, and Showcase 2, which is looking at care, connectivity, and recovery in the era of COVID, hosted by Viasat. So those will be taking place immediately following the conclusion of the session today. We then have a short break, an hour or so's break, before we move on to the final plenary session of the event, which is going to be looking at national roadmaps for 5G and getting some examples of different roadmaps that are in place. And then we move to the finale. So we first of all have some closing remarks, and we're delighted to be joined by the new Regional Director of Asia and the Pacific from the ITU, Atsuko Okuda, who's going to be making some closing remarks. And then the final word is over to you guys. So the final Have Your Say session will be your chance to come up onto the stage, to bring your audio and your video feed live, and to give some of your conclusions, some of your takeaways from the conference so far. So please do make sure you stick around for that. And again, come and get involved and give your thoughts on the sessions that have taken place. So having said all that, we've got lots ahead of us. So I think I better get things kicked off by passing over to our moderator for the first session. So as I said, the first session is going to be looking at sub-1 gigahertz band. And I'm now delighted to welcome to the stage Mark Eschenberg from Ether. Hi, Mark. Mark is going to be moderating the first session and introducing our speakers. So Mark, we're looking forward to it, and over to you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Dan, and good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to be back at the Asia Pacific Spectrum Management Conference. To be honest, one of my favorite conferences in the year, just because in the region there's so much exciting things going on. I hope you've all enjoyed the sessions so far. I thought it's been a fascinating and interesting conference, and I think, Dan, the numbers you just showed speak for themselves. If you have such an audience, it's clear why people are joining in. As Dan already mentioned, the focus of this first session of the day is on low frequency spectrum. As most of you know, of course, these sessions on low frequency tend to sometimes become a bit interesting because it's such a valuable piece of spectrum. You have good propagation, you have many different services who are interested in using the band, and as such, there's sometimes a bit of conflict on who gets access to which part of the spectrum. So it's always important to stay up to date on what's going on in the bands and what the future plans are. And I'm very excited to have as pretty much always with Forum Europe, Forum Global, a very wide and expert panel today to help us go through this discussion. We have from the Nepal Telecoms Authority, Mani Sholagan, who will give us a bit of a view on why sub-1 gigahertz is important in Nepal. And Mani, very interested to hear a presentation, and good morning, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. And can I have my slide displayed? So thank you, Mark, for giving me an opportunity to speak on behalf of Nepal Telecommunication Authority. I'm quite honored to be able to share Nepal's experience on deployment of some sub-1 gigahertz LTE network in Nepal. In our experience, sub-1 gigahertz spectrum has been vital in delivering broadband connectivity to the rural part of the country, like Nepal, with a complex geographical terrain and sparse population. Sub-1 gigahertz spectrum has been vital in mitigating digital divide for a developing country. And in the pandemic situation like now, it has further justified its mission-critical role as online classes and vital meetings and virtual meetings have demanded increased broadband connectivity in the rural part of the country, just like in the urban part of the country. So sub-1 gigahertz spectrum has been lifeline of digital economy even in this difficult time. Please, next. So let me give you a glimpse of Nepal's digitalization drive. Nepal is a mountainous country with 80% of its land covered by the mountains. And it is a touristic country. And out of 14 tallest mountains in the world, we have 8 mountains in Nepal. So fixed network deployment is quite challenging because of high fiber deployment costs and difficult maintenance, whereas there is an enormous potential for development of mobile broadband services. Let me give you a quick review on a few of the data of Nepal. Nepal has a population of 30 million, and mobile penetration at the moment stands at 120%. And mobile broadband penetration is roughly around 55%, and 4G user penetration is 35%. So Nepal's most of the population is a young population. So this actually makes a strong business case. The vibrant population makes a strong business case for mobile broadband business in Nepal. Next, please. So let me give you a brief overview of Digital Nepal initiative launched by our government some time ago. The Digital Nepal initiative is recognized by the government as a key enabler for digital economy in the country. Government of Nepal has recognized ICT as a key tool or engine for promoting socio-economic development at the fastest possible rate. So some time ago, the government of Nepal launched a consolidated Digital Nepal program intended to maximize use of ICT in all the sectors, ranging from agriculture, tourism to the health sectors. And as a key implementing agency of Nepal government, ICT implementing agency of Nepal government, Nepal Telecom Authority has twin roles in implementation of a Digital Nepal initiative. In one side, Nepal Telecom Authority is focused in constructing and revamping infrastructure, digital infrastructure, such as backbone networks, district level access network, and other infrastructure such as data center and ICT labs. With the use of our USO funds, we've been constructing broadband access network towards the Bid Hill highway of Nepal, and also we are creating a broadband access network in all 77 districts of Nepal. And on top of that, we are also mobilizing our funds towards revamping infrastructure around this data center and ICT labs across government school in Nepal. And in other hand, NTA is also creating conducive environment as enabler of digital Nepal by means of policy support in various sectors. Next, please. So I'm pleased to share the use case of sub-1 GHz band and its output. Nepal Telecom has secured digital dividend 800 band some time ago. And prior to the deployment of digital dividend band, they were already using LTE 1800. So with the use of digital dividend band 1800, we were able to maximize the population coverage from 50% to 80%. So which is 60% increment. And at the same time, we're able to increase the average user download for up to 20%. So thanks to carrier aggregation applied between LTE 800 and LTE 1800. So our experience in deployment of DD 800 has been quite desirable, and it has played a great role in improving 4G population coverage and user experience in the country. The next one, please. So let me give you some insight about Digital Nepal outcome. Digital Nepal has benefited to the people and other business verticals and society as a whole during this pandemic time. Due to the pandemic and lockdown, the educational institutions were shut, government offices and small businesses were closed. But thanks to the Digital Nepal initiative, we were still able to keep the economy going to some extent. And here you can see on the lower left-hand side of this slide, during the lockdown, the traffic got increased in a significant portion. And on the right-hand side, you can see that the daytime traffic was increased. Daytime traffic was increased due to lockdown. And even in this difficult time, we were able to keep the economy going, and thanks to the robust network offered by the operators on LTE. Next one, please. So this is the spectrum roadmap for Nepal. As you can see on the lower side of the slide, we have already awarded LTE 800 and 1800, and currently 900 megahertz and 2100 megahertz are on UMTS bands. But in a matter of weeks or months, we are transforming them to LTE. So soon we'll be having LTE on not only on 800 and 1800 bands, but also in 2100 and 900 band. We are going to have technology neutral technology neutral regime in our frequency policy. And towards the end of 2020 or beginning of 2021, we expect to release spectrum in 2.6 gigahertz and probably in 2.3 gigahertz and in 700 megahertz. And in future, when there is a more demand for ubiquitous 5G networks, we'll be releasing spectrum in 3.5 gigahertz and 4.8 gigahertz. And of course, millimeter wave would be coming in future as well. Next, please. So now I'm going to talk about a plan of action for Nepal's 5G deployment. We are currently at the planning a trial of 5G by end of 2020, and a board of NTA has already identified 5G spectrums, and we have also recommended to the frequency committee that the 5G spectrum for initial use, for trial use, should be free of charge for 1 year from the date of deployment. And the frequency committee headed by the ICT minister is expected to approve this policy very soon. And between 2021 and 2022, we expect to roll out 5G networks in 700 and 2.6 megahertz band. And by end of 2022, commercial usage of 5G is expected in 700 and 2.6 gigahertz band. And by 2025, we expect to have a massive nationwide 5G footprint in Nepal. And by end of 2022, we expect to have at least 70% population coverage by 5G networks. And the whole thing would accelerate development of the country, and it will boost the digital economy. Next, please. So thank you very much. I'll be available later on the interaction again. Thank you.
Manny, thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. I particularly took away the traffic increases from the recent pandemic that you often see on fixed networks, but of course, as you explained, that's not possible if the fixed infrastructure isn't there. So it shows how important low-band spectrum can be, and it shows with your spectrum roadmap how important it is to have a clear plan toward the spectrum. So it's very fascinating, and thank you very much for these insights. On a side note, I'm very happy that you classify young people as below 45. So that's a kind of a boost to the confidence in the early morning here in Germany. So that was a positive side note as well. Moving straight on to the next speaker. After having had a regulator's perspective, we will now get a view from the industry, in particular from one of the suppliers of the equipment that helps us bring 5G or kind of support the low bands. So I'm very pleased to introduce Kai Sahana, who's head of 5G at Nokia. Kai, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Really excited to be here and speaking on behalf of my company and talking about 5G, which is my favorite topic. So focus on low frequencies is the topic of today. If I get the next slide, please. So until today, a lot of the 5G discussions have been, and the allocations and launches have been on the centimeter wave and millimeter wave spectrum bands. So centimeter wave bands driven very much by APAC countries, and then millimeter wave driven by North America. But now we are seeing the low bands becoming to the picture, as we saw already from the previous presentation from Mani's presentation, that 700 band, for example, is already in the very beginning of their 5G plans, which is nice to hear. So why is that? It's because low bands are really a welcome addition to the 5G selection of bands. So that's for several reasons. There are simple reasons, such as the marketing purposes. So you would want to provide the 5G logo in a large area for your consumer base from day one, immediately when you launch your network. You don't get that much of capacity from the low bands 5G, but it is better than the 4G on the same band. So if you're thinking about the spectral efficiency due to several features, such as the spectrum usage, link carrier, and so on, so we can see already somewhere around 30% better spectral efficiency in 5G in the low FDD bands compared to the same in LTE. So 5G is useful also for low bands in that purpose. Providing the wider capacity coverage is also important. So as the networks of today are typically uplink limited, and the capacity layer that you're providing, for example, on a centimeter wave or millimeter wave bands, can only reach so far. The current way of non-standalone anchoring of the 5G layer on an LTE layer is helping on the uplink, but there's even further coverage to be expected when you do carrier aggregation between your 5G capacity and coverage band. So there your uplink is going through the low band 5G, and downlink can be then combined by the low band and high band wherever you are in the coverage area of the capacity layer. There's another reason, which is the narrowband coverage. So if you are deploying 5G for something else than your consumers, then for IoT applications, it is essential to have a wide coverage for some applications. Think about drones, think about traffic control, think about logistics use cases. A lot of them have been envisioned for the real 5G, and once there's a standalone 5G networks available, they are coming to the market right now. First network already launched. So this is then natural for low bands because there's no coverage anchor layer needed for that. There's the latency discussion. For these IoT applications, low latency may be of key importance. And there's the 1 millisecond latency that everybody hears about 5G. Well, that is correct, but it's only available in millimeter waves and FDD bands. Since in centimeter wave bands with TDD, due to the scheduling, there's always some 3-4 millisecond latency to be expected. That's just because of the nature of the network. Their industrial IoT applications and demands can be met with millimeter wave and low band FDD. And this can be provided in wide areas for applications that don't necessarily need that much of capacity or throughput. Then there's the rollout costs. So one of the key reasons that operators are claiming to hinder 5G adoption is the revenue versus rollout costs, i.e. CapEx, how much are you spending on your network rollout? With the wide area coverage with low band 5G, it's fairly straightforward to put a good coverage on your 5G network, and on top of that, you can reuse a lot of your existing network rollout. Now, is that possible today? Now, device support is already there, so there's an ecosystem for low band 5G already. Current generation chips that have become available this year are supporting FDD. So there's not we are not ahead of the curve here. So this is already possible. Migration for the 5G on the networks that have already been deployed there is possible. So as said, the existing radio hardware, at least with us, can be upgraded with software to 5G. So if you are deployed LTE on the bands of say 700, 850, 900 megahertz, then this is possible to be upgraded to 5G. And having said that, there's also the modernization ongoing. So currently, there's more and more move to dual band or triple band radios in the networks. So, for example, 700, 850, 900 megahertz combinations to be rolled out. Those kind of triple band radios are already available. So when modernizing the networks, it is natural to also then provide 5G on some of those bands, one or several of those bands. Therefore, you don't necessarily need a kind of a separate 5G rollout on a new band. Rather, you are modernizing your network at the same time as you are deploying a 5G layer. And the migration can be gradual. So dynamic spectrum sharing, it is the kind of hype word discussed today, but that's actually an enabler for real gradual migration of 5G on the low bands. Here, what it does is basically allocating the band dynamically to 4G or 5G, depending on the usage of each technology. And with as low as 10 millisecond intervals, you can adapt to the changing traffic patterns. With a caveat that there is a penalty with DSS on both LTE and 5G capacity compared to if you have a pure 4G or 5G allocation, but the benefits in here probably override the downsides of that. So if you look at the status where we are today in APAC, I believe my colleagues will be presenting later on in this session about the status of the allocations. But in short, in APAC region, the bands are already assigned for especially 700 megahertz in some countries in the APAC region, such as Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, and so on. And in many of them are in live use already. And some of the upcoming auctions in some of the countries is being planned to be for 700 to be allocated for 5G. So what is our guidance, or what are our priorities in regulatory aspects? In our opinion, the low band 5G should be made available for 5G just to boost the rollouts and not to be lagging behind in the technology and connectivity race that we are having today. The bands as such should be technology neutral, so that there's possible for utilizing the low bands most efficiently. So if there's for example, depending on device availability or price points or use case development, and no need initially to go for 5G, you can go LTE first on those bands, and then these can be migrated gradually to 5G as we need. Or then some of the allocated spectrum can go to 5G right away, and with the dynamic spectrum sharing, decide by usage which technology is being used on those bands. Which bands to be used is probably 700 and 28 megahertz, 700 megahertz FDD band, since the ecosystem is already ready in there. According to GSA, the band N28 is in the top 3 of the supported FDD bands. So in addition to band 1 and band 3, this is the most popular band. 600 megahertz should be considered next. This is also supported already by over 20 devices today. And if there's not possibility to be cleared, that band to be cleared because of the digital terrestrial television, then there's also the opportunity to go to SDL supplementary downlink of that one. And the bands will be allocated FDD. Probably we have a discussion later on in the session about that. So where are we in this band? It's basically, we have already made the very first 700 megahertz low band deployment in Australia already in May this year. And in DSS, we have already done a lot of that between 2G, 3G, and 4G. And now with the devices coming to the market, we'll go with the 4G, 5G DSS as we go forward. Many of our radios are already upgradable to 5G. We actually made an announcement that 5 million of the radios that are implemented in the field can be upgraded to 5G. And this mostly is about FDD and less than 1 gigahertz bands. So this is the status of 5G low bands. So to sum it up, basically 5G on low bands is necessary, welcome, and it's possible to do that very fast. And we are ready for providing that in the networks already now. So thank you.
Kai, thank you very much. I was about to say you've shown very clearly that that 5G is not just about high bands, but I think you just wrapped that up about 10 seconds before me. Brilliant. Very interesting perspective, and kind of I think you showed how smooth the transition can be based on what's possible on the networks and with your equipment. The next speaker I'd like to talk about. It's very important to remember that when people talk about sub-1 gigahertz, it's often pitted as mobile versus broadcasting. But there's other users in the bands, users that have for whom the sub-1 gigahertz band is very important. And I'm very happy to have Dr. Andreas Wilczek here, who's speaking on behalf of the PMSE sector. So Andreas, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have the pleasure to talk about audio PMSE in the sub-1 gigahertz range. So I'm talking about the tools which are used for content creation. which is later on the content distributed via the mobile networks or the broadcast networks. So we are in the front part of the value chain of all the other sectors. So next slide, please. So I selected some use cases which have all in common that they can happen everywhere, can be done by anyone and at any time. So audio PMSE, other names in the ITU domain are service ancillary to production or to broadcasting, usually coverage a wide variety of use cases. So the most important one is the live music. So you have a festival or concert, and there we have very stringent latency requirements because you have a wireless microphone and an in-ear monitor at the artist. So you have source and sink of the signal in one person. And this requires that you have a latency below 4 millisecond round trip. Yeah, and this is something which is very challenging for the technology. And so far, none of the standardized technologies are able to do it in a digital form. And so this is the reason why a lot of audio PMSE specific technologies are used. The next use case are electronic news gathering. Yeah, they can happen ad hoc. So when there is a disaster or a special event, you have a lot of reporters coming along, and they usually coordinate themselves in the spectrum usage. And then you can have this as well in a studio setting, where everything is a little bit more stable. Yeah, the same is available for conferences, so you can have them in an ad hoc manner. Yeah, so people meeting in a business room, and then you have remote participation, but you have to ensure that the audio quality is quite good. So you distribute basically microphones to the desk, and they are connected wirelessly to the wide area network. Then we have the use case audio for video. Everyone knows that more and more private people are starting to create content. So for example, video bloggers on YouTube, Instagram, and all the other services. So depending on the use case, the demand for radio spectrum varies from some megahertz up to 230 megahertz when you have a very large festival, and even more when you have, for example, the Olympics in your country. Next slide, please. Yeah, so audio PMSE, so wireless microphones and in-ear monitoring systems operate on a tuning basis. This means the equipment is tuned to a frequency which is locally not used for any other service. It's not surprising that we make use of the broadcasting bands, so which are allocated to the broadcasting service, and we are then using the gaps which are just there because it's a high power, high tower network. And in order to coordinate the spectrum use between the different countries, these gaps are existing, and locally we make use of them. We are a low power application with a typically 50 milliwatt total transmit power. And what is obvious from this slide is that there's a big part in 470 to 694 megahertz, which is more or less available globally for the use of audio PMSE equipment, thanks to the common allocation to the broadcasting service. In this slide, I also show that, especially in CPT and in US, we have typically allocated the duplex gaps to audio PMSE, so that there's also a shared use possible regarding this duplex gaps with the mobile service. Next slide, please. The audio PMSC tuning ranges above 1 GHz cannot replace the sub-1 GHz frequency ranges, but help to handle going spectrum demands by audio PMSC use. So examples are 1350 MHz to 1525 MHz or parts of it, which are already allocated in CPT region or in the US. And these frequency ranges are gaining support globally by regulators and by the pro audio manufacturers. In Europe, the frequency range 1785 to 805 MHz is harmonized for audio PMSC use and is gaining support also in the Asian Pacific region. Next slide, please. There is at ITU level an endeavor for worldwide and regional harmonization and conditions formulated in the ITUR Resolution 59-2. These are studies on the availability of frequency bands for worldwide and regional harmonization conditions for their use by terrestrial electronic news gathering systems, including PMSE. The target is to have updated information regarding the frequencies which are available to audio PMSE and the usage conditions on regional and global level. So there are two proposed workflows: which bands are available for PMSE, which technologies are available now and or are foreseen, and another workflow is what are the user requirements, which technologies do support that, which frequency bands are available to support the above. I invite especially the administrations to work together with us on this Resolution 59-2, where Working Party 5C in ITUR has the lead on. Next slide, please. So audio PMSE technologies. So the global market is addressed by audio PMSE equipment. So the ETSI standard EN 342 is the baseline for the product developments, which most manufacturers employ for their product developments. So we have radio interface technologies inside, which are narrowband, analog or digital, with typically 200 kilohertz channel bandwidth. And then we have the upcoming wireless multi-channel audio systems digital with a typical channel bandwidth of 6 or 8 megahertz or even more, just depending on the incumbent use. Audio PMSC specific technologies drives innovation in the pro audio field. Driving factors are audio performance, ease of use, and production workflows. So in the digital, it means we want to come closer to the 0 millisecond latency analog transmission provides, and going towards studio audio quality in wireless, including 3D audio capture. Ease of use and production workflow requirements, including the topic of remote connectivity, is part of it. So we would like to access other networks like the public land mobile networks, satellite fiber, and topics like spectrum availability and licensing. Then certain audio PMSC applications have been realized using standardized wireless technology. The technology capabilities are not so much the driving factor. It's more the workflow consideration and the ease of use and the audio performance. So we have already used DECT for lecturing, presentation, and conferencing use cases and audio for video. The DECT evolution is now also part of IMT, is ready now, and DECT 2020, which is still an IMT 2020 candidate, is to come soon. The advantage of DECT is that it's an everywhere technology which can be used by anyone at any time. And of course, as a manufacturer, we are also working since 2017 on using 3GPP 5G new radio. But this is still a research topic, and we are still far away that our use cases are part of the 3GPP specification, implementation, and any technology commercial viability in the Pro Audio business is not yet clear, but we will see. Yeah. Nevertheless, audio-specific developments are still driving the innovation in our field. Next slide, please. With this, I thank everyone for listening, and I'm happy to take questions later on.
Great. Thanks very much, Andreas, for this presentation, kind of highlighting the importance of the PMSE sector. Also very clearly illustrating the need for global harmonization, and as well, I think what some people don't always realize is that the move to digital may not be as straightforward as everybody may think. So it's important to not just impose solutions that may look obvious, but in the end may severely impact some of your main users. Thanks very much for the presentation. I'm sure there'll be more questions coming in the panel. We've heard already from one of the vendors, and now we'll hear from the mobile industry directly. So our next speaker is Christian Gomez, who's a director of spectrum policy for the Asia Pacific region and at the GSMA. So Christian, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be sharing this session with you. So for today, next slide, please. I have a very brief agenda with 4 main points to share with you. The first one is about 5G spectrum needs, of which coverage is an element of. Then I'm going to be sharing with you about coverage spectrum and the developments worldwide in this area. But also I want to discuss with you spectrum policy to address coverage, because while we've been discussing what spectrum is useful for coverage, there are also other elements which the regulators can consider to improve coverage in different countries. And hand by hand with the spectrum policy area to address coverage is the licensing of coverage spectrum, which is also important. And if it's not done correctly, it can work to the detriment of the actual coverage that we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So for those who are not familiar with the GSMA, GSMA represents the interests of the mobile industry worldwide, and our companies make up about 750 mobile operators worldwide. And we are also working together with our ecosystem partners, our industry partners, which represent around 300 companies, which are part of the wider mobile ecosystem. Next slide, please. So different spectrum to fulfill different needs. So when we talk about coverage spectrum, we're talking about the bands below 1 gigahertz. These are very useful for delivering services especially in the rural areas, but also indoor. So these bands are quite important. And doesn't matter whether we are talking about a market which is part of an emerging market, or if we're talking about a market in a developed country, coverage will always be important in both scenarios. So these frequencies are very important for consumers, for government, and for the industry overall, because it's the layer of the mobile service that can give us the reach either in building or if we want to go out to suburban areas or the rural areas. So it's a very important part of the spectrum. Next slide, please. So in terms of coverage spectrum and what's happening worldwide, there's been plenty of development in the different bands. So when we talk about, for example, digital dividend, we talk about the 800 megahertz in Europe, plus the 700 megahertz, which is also a digital dividend band. We had a lot of uptake here in Asia Pacific, and it's now being taken up in Europe as well, and in North America, and Latin America, Africa, and Middle East. So 700 megahertz is by far, in terms of fast broadband, mobile broadband, is the most harmonized. Now we have also developments in the 600 megahertz band as a result of more efficiencies being done in the broadcasting side of it. So a lot of countries are now looking at expanding coverage, since 5G is very important for areas like Internet of Things, for example, where you need more wider coverage beyond the metropolitan areas. Bands like the 600 megahertz become an interesting choice, especially in countries that are reducing the use of terrestrial television, because television is moving, for example, to other means of delivery, such as the internet itself. Therefore, the question for government is, how can we use the band for a service which is of high value to society? So mobile becomes a key choice. Next slide, please. So in this map, we can see the uptake worldwide of the 3 bands generally referred as digital dividends. So in black, everything is to do with 800 megahertz, largely in Europe. Then in green, we have the 700 megahertz band, used largely in Latin America and Asia Pacific. And then we also now in red, we have either the 700 plus the 600 megahertz band or the 600 megahertz band. And you can see how the momentum is growing and creating a lot of interest in terms of the lower band, 600 megahertz in particular. Next slide, please. So talking about 600 megahertz and specifics of 600 megahertz, for our region here in Asia Pacific, it's important to note that 600 megahertz is already a mobile allocation in the radio regulations. It appears as a co-primary service, and the band itself, it has been already standardized at 3GPP level. And here in the slide, you can see what the band arrangement looks like and the specifics of the frequency boundaries. About seven countries in this region already identified the 600 megahertz band for IMT 5G services as a result of WRC 15. And we see that this band is also being considered in other markets, not just in Asia Pacific. So what's important about the 600 megahertz is that a lot of governments are working on transitioning from analog to digital television to free up 700 megahertz. And considering that there is a growing ecosystem now in 600, it is important for governments to look at the long-term plan. And if there is a plan already for 700, it might well be beneficial to look at 600 megahertz and initiate the planning as well for 600 megahertz. Next slide, please. And in terms of the uptake of 600 megahertz, North America is taking the lead largely. So we have the United States as the first country to make the 600 megahertz band available, and using the 3GPP band 71. Canada has also announced that in 2019 already, in fact, they concluded the assignment of 600 megahertz. Mexico is planning to auction the band in 2020. And we have a number of other countries undergoing different processes for the assignment of 600 megahertz. On the bottom right, we have some of those countries, including New Zealand, for example, is already there, where the band is being planned for mobile, and a number of other countries here in the region, as well as in region 2 in the Americas. The important thing to note as well is that there is an ecosystem in 600 megahertz in the making. So at the network level, we have equipment available. At the device level, there are more than 61 compatible devices. And T-Mobile, for example, is using already 600 megahertz for LTE, and it will also roll out 5G. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I want to point the conversation to a different aspect of coverage, which is spectrum policy to address coverage. Because while we have useful spectrum for coverage, such as 800, 700, and 600, We also need to make sure that there are the right incentives in place to make sure that we can get further out and reach out to more users in the rural areas. So here we have an example of different policy instruments used by spectrum agencies to achieve coverage or to improve coverage. So we have United States, which implemented reverse auctions to release the 600 megahertz in order to deploy it in rural areas. In the UK, we have a different model where operators agree to build shared rural networks. Then we have France, where the spectrum fees have been lowered as a trade-off for coverage. We have Brazil, where infrastructure sharing and coverage obligations are being looked at both by the government in order to expand coverage in such large country as Brazil. And then we have a few others which are a bit of a mix. So the message here is that it's not just about the technology, it's not just about the frequencies, but also it's about the mindset from the governments which are leading the strategy for coverage in setting the goals going forward about funding or share funding or different ways to achieve rural coverage by partnering with mobile operators. Next slide, please. Pricing is also very important. Coverage bands are or have been quite pricey over the years. So if the aim is to improve coverage, if the prices for spectrum are too high, there will definitely be an issue or a barrier for investment. If the spectrum is too expensive, there will be less funding for the actual networks. Next slide, please. And to close off, another important aspect in terms of coverage is the licensing, and we need to think about removing, for example, conditions on technology. If bands are being made technology specific, those conditions need to be removed in order to have technology neutrality. This is very important because technology moves on, and if a license, which is done for 20 years, says this license is for 4G or 3G, then the conversion of that license to another generation of technology becomes problematic and costly. So technology neutrality is very important in order to make sure that those coverage bands, which are so useful, are not jeopardized by having unnecessary conditions. And next slide, please. Just to say goodbye now, we have a number of resources online available to you, and you can look at all of this information in more detail, as well as our studies and our positions in our online library of studies. So with that, I hand over the floor back to Mark. Thank you very much, Mark.
Christian, thanks very much for this kind of casting an eye into what's probably the near future and putting a stake in the ground for the 600 megahertz. But I think also raising a very important point, again with a longer term view on the detrimental impact that licensing conditions can have. Something that may sound very sensible in the first place at the license assignment stage to foster new technology, but actually becomes a hindrance 5-10 years down the road. And there may be other ways to deal with such an issue. And maybe we get time to discuss this later. So thank you very much for that presentation. And last in our panel, but most certainly not least, we have a view from the broadcasting industry, and I'm very pleased to introduce Amal Punchieva, who is an independent advisor and here on speaking on behalf of the AIBD. So Amal, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, thank you, Mark, once again, and greetings to you all. So in the next few minutes, I will take you through some of the points that we were planning to discuss in this session. So this, before we lead to that, I'm sure you have been listening to many presenters, including this session. They were talking about the 5G deployment require 3 bands, namely the low, mid, and the high bands. As we know, like a spectrum is a very limited economic natural resource because it's harder to extend, but when you're extending, it's expensive and difficult to operate. So it's always the requirement to optimally use that limited natural resource. So the focus of this session is on what's called sub-gigahertz, 1 gigahertz band. So it's basically looking at, for the broadcasting perspective, the UHF band 4 and 5, which is 470 megahertz to 960 megahertz. So in my few minutes, what I'll try to do is I'll try to highlight 3 aspects that falls under the broadcasting, which is the digital transition, and then that digital dividend coming up, how we can make use of that for 5G. And also, 5G now wants to, like the mobile industry, wants to introduce their next technology, the advancement from 4G to 5G. The broadcast industry also would like to do the same thing. They are not stagnant, and I will show you that there are no alternatives to that, because you probably think this is the important point I wanted to highlight, that the internet delivery or the online is a substitute for that. So this misconception has been failed, and it's just a complementary. So if you look at the this UHF band 4 and 5, so they are used for broadcasting for over many decades. One, to do the delivery, and to other do this program making and special events, what was we just discussed, PMSC. So I'll focus on the delivery side, and then if you look at the broadcasting or the broadcasting service under ITU, it's defined under Radio Regulation 1.38. So it's a transmission of content to the general public without any barrier. So that's the requirement. And then in the past, there's been misconception that through the unmanaged IP, or what we commonly known as OTT, that could deliver the television broadcasting. So there are many evidence. Sometimes we don't have much evidence as research in APAC region, but yesterday also I followed a IEEE BTS distinguished lecture which looked at the European context. It's harder to generalize what's happening there to here, but we know here as well it's the same aspect in our region as well, because in our region only 48.4% do have some sort of a broadband connection, and those are not capable of receiving high definition and very near future ultra high definition. So we need the broadcasting which can carry that with high capacity. So the value of broadcasting has been shown very clearly in the recent times. So I'll give very quickly 2 examples. One is the COVID itself. So during COVID time, the public and all other broadcasters continue to offer the news and the education on health aspect, and entertaining, and also educating the young generation, those who got stuck at home. So they were studying from home remotely while people were studying, while people were working remotely. So the other aspect or the other thing is, I would like to quote one of the research that was presented 2 weeks ago in Australia by the consortium, which they said 97% of Australian households have an antenna to access TV. And they also, 87% of them value the ability to access that TV without any data or internet usage. And they value, 90% of them value that it's an important service. And if it's going to go away, they are going to lose a lot. And this is a country who has already embarked on the 5G as well. But I'll very quickly come to other countries in the APAC, because if you, from the point of view of this conference, under APT, there are 38 member countries. So in these 38 member countries, if you look at how many have already migrated to digital completely, only 7 of them. So there are a lot more. they haven't. So 31 of them haven't done that. So if you look at globally, it's the ITU has 196 members. Only 73 members have done complete analog switch off, and there are 20 who has no idea, and then the balance over 100 are still working on these things. So you see, so there's a sort of a division. There's a kind of a separation or inability to go at the same speed like some other countries. So this also depends on the high diversity in our region, because they are economically, socially, politically, technologically, and also culturally very diverse. They are not quite heterogeneous like in US or in Europe. So it's harder to do that. But at the same time, we do have very most advanced countries, ICT and in broadcasting and in media, like Japan, South Korea, and China. So they are marching forward pretty quickly, but not all the countries can do that. And also there are sub-regions where within APEC, like the Pacific island countries scattered over larger geography in the isolated areas on the sea. So the coverage is very difficult. And also within the 7 adopted in the APEC, Australia and New Zealand are early adopters. So I use that point to one of the important aspects to highlight that. So we started DVB-T at that time, and recently both Australia and New Zealand carried out tests using the DVB-T2 as their next generation television broadcasting, because both Australia and New Zealand, we value broadcasting very much. And I gave you the research that was carried out in Australia. It's the same in New Zealand. But we also have made some reservation for the next generation mobile as well. But can all the other countries in our region do that? There are countries, especially in some of them in the SAARC region, those who have not even started any broadcasting. At the same time, they have a large collection of analog television channels, which are scattered over this complete broad UHF bands, which makes it difficult for them to give away some of the spectrum. And then those countries, those who haven't done that, they do need spectrum to do that. So even those who have gone to the digital television broadcasting, as I told you earlier, they need to go for the next generation TV. So one of the countries is Korea. So Korea already started going into next generation TV with ATSC 3.0. And so they are rolling out, but they also made available some of the channels, some of the spectrum for the 5G as well. So you see the difficulties and then the inabilities completely give away the spectrum, and also the difficulties in harmonizing across the wider region some of these frequencies, and this is very difficult as we advance with the high definition to the ultra high definition technologies and so on, because most of the countries in the Asia Pacific do not have, as I mentioned earlier, the broadband access. Even the ones those who are having will be experiencing the difficulties with the lower bit rate. So they cannot handle the high definition or ultra high definition television content or content through those mechanisms. So it's important that we work very cordially with others. There are also other developments around that the 5G could theoretically could handle or broadcast television services. But there are no costing for the operations yet, and there are no devices available yet. So I see and also the current mechanisms have seen as the most spectrum efficient that way, which maintain the highest quality of the QoS in its network provided by the network operator. and also the highest level of quality of experience when the signal gets to the content gets to the audience, the viewer, having maintained that by the content provider and the television service provider. And one of the observation I did during the conference is that there's been a discussion going around the high expectation or the over prediction of the demand and so on. So there has been a similar situation. I would remember when I was dealing with some of the work in our region in 2015 WRC. So I would like to urge, because the broadcast community recognizes some of the services that 5G could offer, but the mobile need to coexist with broadcast service, having minimal coordination and interference mitigation activities, because that will enable cost-effective solution for both mobile and broadcast industry. So with that, I'll hand over back to Mark, and we could take more during our discussion. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Amal. I think you've made a clear case, and I think current circumstances are, as you said, highlighting the need for continued broadcasting. So thanks very much for that perspective. The audience is bombarding us with excellent questions, and I think we have just less than 20 minutes time. So what I would like to do is I'd like to kick this off, kind of actually tagging on to some of the points that Amal made with a question to all of you, and then we'll see through how many of the questions we get. So I apologize in beforehand to some of the audience members who've asked excellent questions, but we may just not have the time to go through all of them. So the first question I'd like to start with is kind of seeing that we have so many different users in this space who all have a very valid case for using the spectrum. Are there areas for collaboration between, let's say, the mobile and the broadcasting industry, maybe even other users, such that the efficiency of spectrum use, I guess, can be increased, and kind of that crunch we may have in below 1 gigahertz could be eased? So anybody who would like to start off with a response on that?
I'll start, or get the floor rolling a little bit. So the question is about possibility of collaboration.
Indeed.
I think when it comes to the actual spectrum use, this band is very much a legacy band. It's been allocated for a long time. I mean, UHF is been there for a long time, and through the debates in the ITU in some regions, like Region 3, we have a co-primary use of the band already embedded into the governance of this part of the spectrum. So we have broadcasting primary and we have mobile primary. So I think a lot of the collaboration in terms of the actual frequency use has already been done over the years through the ITU WRC process, which decides the actual allocation. Any other form of collaboration, I think, would be commercial. And broadcasters have a business case to deliver content. And now I think that's now their core business is to deliver content, and how they deliver it, whether it is free to air through UHF frequencies, or is it through internet-based, or through the mobile devices by having a commercial agreement with operators. I think that's a different discussion.
Can I make a comment? Yeah, I think as I told earlier, the question of the television broadcast delivery through the internet is not the substitution for television broadcasting. So it's very clear now. So it's globally sort of accepted, and it's as just a complementary form of do that. So it's almost like now this event, we are not only streaming those who are already on it. So we have two other mechanisms through which we get this content to the globe through the Twitter and also to the YouTube. So we look at like a multiple methods. And the I agree with Christian that it is a legacy, but the question is, if in a country X, if they are already broadcasting in the full spectrum, and then can they really say, no, you switch off now, broadcast, we are giving this to the mobile? It won't happen. So the country will suffer anyway, because they cannot allocate that one in that country. So if there are a large number of countries, so that will bring more difficulty. So my perspective always is, if you could have some sort of a harmonization, because that's one of the jobs that I have done in the past globally quite a lot, so that we can achieve the scale of economies, and then that is more affordable and more accessible to larger public.
Manny, I think you also wanted to contribute.
I wanted to share Nepal's experience. To be honest, the broadcasting domain and IMT domain are not having quite good collaboration, in fact, and I don't expect the collaboration to continue because much of 600 megahertz spectrum is already awarded to broadcaster, and these broadcasters actually, they try to use backdoor to enter into MNO domain. So that was kind of challenging. So I don't know whether we should really expect cooperation between the broadcaster and MNO. So it's a big question mark to me. So when the topic was chosen as a collaboration between broadcaster and MNO operators, I don't see a very big collaboration happening in near future.
That's a very clear. Andreas, please.
Yeah, so just to comment on it. So in Europe, we have this 5G broadcast activities in research, yeah, which is essentially broadcast for 5G. Yeah, so basically you transmit a waveform which is understandable by a mobile device, so a 5G device, so that people can watch their TV on the mobile device. Yeah, so this might be a first step in a collaboration, but this has no regulatory impact. Yeah, it's still broadcast service. It's just a different waveform. Yeah, it's just another technology for broadcasting. Yeah, but the fundamental problem always is the implementation. You need products understanding these waveforms. Yeah, so if the cellular mobile industry is not willing to implement, for example, a 6 or 8 megahertz mode to understand this waveform, the mobile device can't understand it. Yeah, so this collaboration cannot happen. Yeah, and the biggest issues, many business relations cause are that there is no value add existing. Yeah? What, for example, would be the value add for the PMSE sector to use 5G? From the technology KPIs, we are already there. So there's nothing 5G can really offer us except remote connectivity. For the broadcast service, the broadcast is this DVB-T2 and the other standards already there, serving the community, yeah, with a high quality. So where is the value add? To the customers, where is the value add to the manufacturers? Yeah, and this discussion is always somehow missing.
Fair point, very good point. I think Christian wanted to reply to that.
Oh, and just back to the panel as well. Broadcasting and ancillary services like wireless microphones are important. And I think everyone appreciates that, for example, public broadcasting has a role to play, and it will always have a role to play. I think the collaboration that we are discussing is more in the realm of what kind of commercial models can emerge for broadcasting to continue delivering the value they have delivered, considering that technology has changed or is changing. So for most viewers nowadays, it's about choice and it's about quality of content. It's not so much about whether they need to have a television with rabbit ears or an antenna on the roof if they can receive everything through their modem or through their mobile phone. I think consumers and viewers are thinking about the quality of the content, the choice, and how they can interact with the content. For example, in Netflix. Netflix has become hugely popular in most markets. And the beauty of that is that people can choose what to watch, what time, whether they want to go back, which is not what happens with free-to-air television. There's very, very limited type of interaction. So I think a lot of telecom companies, actually now provide the consumers and the users with a choice of packages of multimedia, where you can find also public television, all delivered through the digital means, either via your fiber or via mobile. So I think the question is more about how these commercial models are changing based on what the technology can do for the user.
Perfect. Kai, please. Otherwise, it would be unfair.
Yeah, just a quick one. I fully support what Christian was saying, and I think that since in the mobile networks, be it 4G or upcoming 5G, the majority of the traffic is and will be video in whatever way or form, and the people are just getting used to getting video on demand, so whatever they want to watch, be it YouTube or Netflix or any other source, then I think the demand is there. There will be possibilities for collaboration. How that's done technically with technology, there are possibilities already to share the spectrum, like I mentioned, the supplementary downlink, which is especially designed for content such as video, so that the downlink is in the focus. So the coexistence can happen and is poised to happen going forward.
Perfect. Let me at least try and squeeze one more question in, because I with such a great panel of these, I think we won't get too many more. But I think it's an excellent question. It comes from Emmanuel Estrada from Globe Telecom. His statement is that technology neutrality is really the best approach in effective spectrum management. But how can this be balanced with spectrum compatibility across technologies, and I think specifically to avoid interference? So any views from? I see a lot of nodding and smiling. So maybe. Can I ask Christian again to go first, and then kind of we take the panel's view and.
Thank you. So I will put on my hat as a former ITU staff in the VR this time, and I think the question about technology neutrality is important, and the management of interference is already done largely through the ITU studies and how the different industries work together to achieve this compatibility at the allocation level. But once the spectrum is allocated, once it's been agreed on regional and global basis on how to use it and what services are going to use it, then it is actually dangerous to start putting specific labels to say this technology will be using this band, or this other technology will be using this band, because of the pace of technology change. So a lot of those concerns on compatibility are largely already dealt with at the allocation level. And that's why we have these 4-year cycles, actually to make sure that the compatibility is achieved.
Andreas, it sounded like you had you wanted also to contribute to this discussion.
Yeah, so basically, as we are doing application-specific technologies, yeah, so we have this compatibility issues and coexistence issues always, yeah. So the EN342 for the wireless microphones delivers basically spectrum masks, yeah, and to ensure that we are getting compatible with the broadcast service and compatible with each of our own technologies. So everyone has to obey this mask. And the largest issue, which is always there, is basically the receiver blocking. Yeah, then you have a very, very strong interferer close to you. Yeah, it's blocking your receiver and you can't operate anymore. Yeah. For this reason, in a PMSE perspective, it's always important that the incumbent is observable for us and that we can have a schedule, yeah, when it's operating. And this is why sharing this broadcast service is so easy for us. It's always clearly identifiable by spectrum scan, and usually a broadcast station is not moving. Yeah, and it has a strong power and it is wide. Yeah.
Manny, would you like to add something on this from a regulator's perspective?
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that we are for technology neutrality, and all our spectrum bands would be awarded on technology neutrality basis. And technology neutrality is the future, and we are committed to go for that. Thank you.
I think there's broad agreement between the panel. I think, and it's also reflected in the just to move to the polls for a second here, because we had 3 different polls that were run whilst we had this panel. The question was asked as well whether there are specific cases where spectrum should be awarded on technology-specific base, and despite that caveat of are there specific cases, we still had 62% of people saying no, it should always be technology neutral. And I'm sure the 38% are very, it sounds like they're probably kind of very specific cases where there may be a small case, but I think we're in broad agreement that technology neutrality is the way forward. I would also like, in the interest of time, and because the results surprised me a little bit, I would like to just kind of highlight the other 2 polls, and maybe to round up the panel, just kind of see whether you have any views on the results. The first question was that in a common area, would you rather watch TV on the lounge TV or your mobile device? I'll be honest, I expected about 90% on your mobile device, but there's actually still 1/4 of people who are very happy to watch on the common area TV set. So maybe I'm underestimating the desire for linear TV, and the broadcasting industry maybe right all along. But as I said, only 24% or 24% said common TV set, and 76% said on mobile. And then there was a second question, which I'll come back to in the second question, which said whether countries should make UHF spectrum available on an FDD or TDD basis. And here again, we had actually a fairly split view across the 3 options. The first option was FDD, the second option was TDD, and the third was a mixture of both. And it said 31% were for FDD, 26% for TDD, and 43% for a mixture of both. So I think we have a couple of minutes left, and whatever reactions you have to those 2 polls, I'd be very happy to hear your views. So maybe Christian, we start with you, and then we move on to Kai.
Sure. So I'll take the first question about watching television on your lounge or on your mobile device in your lounge. Or I'll say the question was too open. I think the question should have said, at what time of the day? It depends, So if I'm going to work in the subway, I'm going to watch, on my mobile device, and I want to have that flexibility. But if I'm at home at dinner time, I'll probably expect to have the big screen in front of me. So I think it depends on the time of the day. And I think that's the beauty of mobile, is that you have that flexibility to choose where you take your media, whether you take your media with you, whether if you're in the car or in the public transport, or sometimes now, as you can see right now with COVID-19, everything is about broadcasting through the online media. So a lot of people are becoming broadcasters themselves, and they're using the internet. And having a mobile device available with good connection would allow you to do live broadcasts, wherever you are in the garden, or whether you are on the go or inside your house. So that's kind of the beauty of having that flexibility.
I think Kai, you also wanted to reply.
Yeah, just quickly on this TV set versus mobile device, but probably it's also a generation thing. So I see the youth is mostly watching a mobile device. They're used to that, and the size of it doesn't really matter. But I grew up with television, so maybe every now and then I go back and just watch from the large screen. Maybe that's the thing. No more to that one, but probably to the spectrum about UHF, so FDD or TDD. I'm a bit surprised, because I've been always thinking that FDD is really the best for low band, since due to the coverage, because the coverage is the key aspect of a low band. Not so much capacity, but coverage, and also providing the low latency. So both of those can be provided with FDD. TDD is then providing the flexibility of uplink and downlink, but where, again, going back to our discussion of providing video and downlink especially, would be beneficial with TDD. But still, I think the FDD benefits are overwhelming. So I thought maybe if there are other views on why this would be the case, that a mixture of both would be such beneficial. Would be glad to hear.
I would have been interested as well to see the option of SDL, because I think that's, of course, as you mentioned before, supplementary downlink may be another interesting way to use that spectrum and kind of collaborate between the industry. I don't know, Amal or Manny, if you have any reactions to those polls, any specific comments?
Yeah, very quick comment on the first one, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding among people what's linear and non-linear, or what a broadcaster does. The user-generated content is a very little thing, and it's a user-generated. And then we can have all the user-generated running the station, but television broadcasts is a very expensive business. Using more high quality content. So, and also today the broadcaster could cater to both over there as well as online as well. And then the interactivity through like HBB TV engines, which provide the interactivity. So that will remain for years, I believe.
Excellent. Andreas, Manny, just any closing remarks from both of you, given that we had the other three panelists already say?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the use of a mobile device depends if I'm really mobile. Yes, when I'm at home, I'm using Wi-Fi. Yeah, when I'm at home, I'm watching normal TV via satellite or DVB-T too, because I have the infrastructure there.
Any final words from you?
Guaranteed.
Yeah, I just have a statement. It would really depend on the content. If there is a breaking news about my travel plan, about my travel, or the interesting content in the TV, probably I would watch TV. Other than that, otherwise I would watch something else on my mobile device.
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I think I'd also kind of in the current political situation, I think some of the independence of broadcast media may be quite useful to inform discussions. Although that's probably a very different point for a different conference at some point in the future. Again, my apologies to all the excellent questions from the audience we couldn't take, but I hope that to me an active discussion is always a sign of a good panel. So thanks very much to all five of you for your wide-ranging and very interesting views. I personally very much enjoyed the session, and I hope also same for you and for the audience as well. But I also appreciate that, Dan, we've stretched our time to the absolute limits. So thanks for giving us a few extra minutes.
No worries, guys. I'm just sorry to have to bring it to a close, because as you said, Mark, it really was an excellent discussion. So thank you to all of you as panelists. Mark, thank you as well for your excellent moderation. So really appreciate it to everyone. And as Mark said, thank you to our panelists as well. Sorry, our audience as well for the questions and things that were put forward there. I know that there were quite a few questions we didn't get around to answering. So if it's all okay with you guys as the panelists, what we'll do, we will send the questions to you all afterwards. And if there's any ones those that you want to answer offline, then please feel free to do that. So we'll send all the questions received out to you afterwards. So yeah, thank you very much. So next we now move on, and we now have our next showcase session. So we have two showcase sessions taking place now, about to start in the next minute or so. So on showcase stage 1, we have the session Industry Transformation Powered by 5G, which is going to be hosted by Ericsson. And on showcase stage 2, we have Care, Connectivity and Recovery in the Era of COVID, which is hosted by Viasat. So 2 sessions, both sound really interesting. Of course, you have to unfortunately make a choice in one of those, but they are both being recorded, and there will be replays available afterwards as well. So please do now make your way over to one of the showcase sessions. As I said, they'll be starting in the next minute or so. And then we're back here on the main stage at 4 o'clock Jakarta time for our final plenary session of the conference, which is going to be looking at planning ahead and national roadmaps for 5G. So looking forward to the showcases. Please make your way over there now, and we'll see you back here at 4 o'clock. Thank you.